Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on your time zone. I welcome you to the month of March. And today I'm going to be talking about something I had addressed some years back, namely the cult of positivity, but I want to delve into specific aspects of it. In some sense, it is a religion of our time. And the title, Eat, Pray, and Be Positive, seems to sync pretty well with the mentality that's currently afoot in our society and in our civilization, in the West in particular. Now, before I get to the meat and drink of the video, I want to illustrate what I'm talking about with two anecdotal examples. Some time back, there was a young man that I had met on the internet. The context doesn't really matter so much, and neither does his name or anything else, who on several occasions asked me for lack of a better word, advice. Now, personally, I am loath to give advice because who am I to give advice? I'm just some guy, nobody special. I do have some life experience over a young person, that's absolutely certain, but still. Nonetheless, I am willing on occasion to listen to people. I'm sympathetic to certain people's plights, etc. So I gave him my ear, and I gave him my words on more than one occasion, several different occasions. And without going into the details, this particular gentleman suffered, I think, he didn't describe it very well, but from some cognitive damage due to excessive chemical consumption in his youth, although he is still pretty youthful, but as a teenager, etc., among other things. And part of what I noticed about this guy was that everything I said had seemingly slipped in through one ear and out the other, which is to say he took nothing from the conversations and remembered nothing from the conversations. That's all well and good. It happens. I don't remember everything, and nobody remembers everything. But after each successive conversation I had with him, it seemed as if it was that film Groundhog Day, where I believe it's Bill Murray is just repeatedly thrust in the scenario. That's how it felt. And at some point in time, I became somewhat critical. I said, well, if you do X, for example, lay off the chemicals, change this, change Y, whatever, maybe things could go in a different direction. Maybe things would be fundamentally different. Now, I'm not some guy who's obsessed with self-improvement, and I think that's also a kind of almost dogmatic religion of our time, because there's a context and a time and place to improve yourself, and sometimes there's a time and place simply to observe and learn, and sometimes, yes, surrender is the appropriate action, because otherwise every other option might kill you or destroy you. It's very contextual, but completely ignoring all the things I said and just ignoring the points I was trying to make regarding his own inability to absorb information, he later denigrated me as being "quote-unquote" negative. He didn't use the term negative Nancy, but everyone knows that. "Quote-unquote" negative. And this is a perfect instance of trying to shut down conversation with the notion that positivity by itself is a kind of panacea for all of our problems, and moreover that "quote-unquote" negativity is the source of the problems themselves, and negativity is the principal evil here. Another less relevant anecdote in my online gaming experiences, particularly in Overwatch, which I, for the time being, have been retired from, at least the competitive scene, for reasons that I don't need to go into, but it's just bad. This idea that has been consistently reinforced there, and I've heard in other gaming scenes, the need to be simply positive for the sake of being positive. Whereas I've had players on my team who were throwers who actively fought each other, verbally at least, and because they just out-skilled, as it were, the enemy team, we won anyway. And teams that were completely positive that got absolutely demolished. And this speaks to the idea that real ability at the end of the day is probably the most important factor in any situation where you're trying to achieve something. Positivity is not the crucial factor here. So, what is my sales pitch here? My sales pitch, beyond the needless repetition and annoyance of why do we have to listen to you gotta be positive, positivity, is that positivity, in as much as it's presented these days, the cult of positivity, the religion of positivity, blocks both individuals and groups' ability to assess situations for what they are. And when you block that ability to assess a situation for what it is, be it a societal problem, civilizational problem, in the gaming context, or an individual's problem, as the case of the young gentleman I had mentioned at the outset, you can arrive at no solution. Because every fix, every requirement, every request even, to engage in reflective and critical thought and thinking is downplayed and is turned on its head by saying that you're quote-unquote negative. Now, I will be the first person to admit that I tend to be quote-unquote pessimistic. I think that is a reflection of observing human norms and human behavior, human psychology and evolution, and being pretty much hyper-aware of these things. And in that context, it's very difficult to be a quote-unquote positivity cultist or an optimist. Optimism, to my mind, in the context of human behavior, psychology, and evolution, is the last bastion of the scoundrel, oftentimes. And it fits well with the cult of positivity. You'll notice, in addition, that the vast majority of the positivity cultists, and I'm not referring to the pause, this sort of internet slang referring to this kind of derivative of HIV positive, although I suppose they could be included as well, this cultural leftism or whatever. But you'll notice that the extremely optimistic people, on average, tend to be less intelligent, if only because they are not particularly aware of just how bad human beings are at a multitude of activities. And in as much as they are intelligent, they tend not to pay attention to the details that would be most relevant either to the greater whole or themselves as individuals. Now, as I said, this is not the first time I've talked about this, and I believe there's even a book on the subject, or at the very least there's some discussions on this. But this is, among many others, one of the great barriers to progressing both as individuals and as a collective, as a species. This inane sense of being eternally positive about everything. I even know people whom I respect a fair deal, who tend to veer on the positive when it's simply not justified just for the sake of being positive. Now, I'm the kind of person, and I don't know if I would argue it's perhaps not beneficial to everyone, but if I have terminal pancreatic cancer, I'd prefer to know. I don't want to live under delusion, and pancreatic cancer is an almost certain death sentence, incidentally, if you're not familiar with the mortality rates on it, or the fatality rates. I'd prefer to know that. Not everyone is like that, but this also fits in with the notion that everyone is a winner in our society, right? Everyone is a winner because everyone participated. There are times when this cult of improvement and cult of always bettering yourself and pushing yourself to the limit is insane, because people, as I said, they need to know when to relent and when not to. There's a time and place for everything. But the opposite of that is this: I don't need to change, I don't need to do anything about my life, because that's just negative. And acceptance is the baseline here. Acceptance is the baseline for any type of behavior, and throw in a bit of positivity and everything is fine. The most destructive, the most unconstructive types of behavior can be hallowed by way of invoking positivity. I've seen it time and again in the anecdotal story, the tale of the young gentleman I offered. It's the same thing. Despite laying back on many different chemicals, he still persists in his chemical addictions and has not a care to really change it long term. Now, I should say, in respect of his quote-unquote autonomy, I don't really like the term autonomy because we're not autonomous by our very nature and the nature of the universe, that, sure, if someone wants to do that, if somebody, I'm not saying he's an alcoholic, but if someone acknowledges that he has a problem and it's a very difficult problem to correct, for example, alcoholism, in many cases where the individual lacks the neurological wherewithal to combat it, or at least would require immense aid, I get that some people just shrug their shoulders and say whatever. But that is not the instance where you invoke positivity just for the sake of positivity. Whether it's a team game, whether it's your own ability to sort yourself out, whether it's some massive economic problem, dealing with facts and details and trying to assess a problem for what it is will always be better than invoking the meme of we need to be positive, we need to smile for the sake of smiling, we need to do all these silly things that in reality don't really have that much impact. Sure, I'm not going to deny that having a positive attitude, encouraging people can be useful, but if there are fundamental deficiencies in their abilities and deficiencies in their personalities, or they have addictions, or just can't do a certain job, being positive isn't going to be enough. They need to either educate themselves or improve themselves and endow themselves with new abilities so they can get the job done. And then, yeah, if you want to pat somebody on the back, that's great. But I'm kind of at my wit's end with regard to just these extremes of the cult of positivity. With regard to these extremes of the cult of positivity that I've been encountering in recent months, it seems to have been growing and growing. Everywhere I go on the internet, I have to listen to the screams of everybody needs to be positive because reasons. There's never a justification for that beyond it makes people feel better and work better. All evidence to the contrary, I would argue. Because in the end, ability, raw ability, combined with self-reflection is going to be a much better tool for achieving either individual ends or collective ends. A bit of a rant, but I wanted to offer some insight as well, and hopefully not too ranty. I shall check you out in the not-too-distant future, assuming I'm still alive, because we're going to be positive, right? You enjoy your weekend, wherever you might be, and take care. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.